This story is inspired by real-life situations and includes fictional elements for entertainment. Not recommended for viewers under 18.
He heard her voice before he could open his eyes. Let him go. Not a whisper, not grief, a decision. And in that moment, trapped somewhere between life and nothingness, Ethan Cole understood something his body hadn't yet caught up to. He had already been left behind. The apartment on the Upper West Side was everything people envied. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Hudson like a living painting. The furniture was curated, not chosen. Clean lines, muted tones, expensive without ever needing to prove it. Even the silence inside felt intentional, like it had been designed. Ethan Cole stood by the kitchen island, watching the reflection of his wife in the glass. Lillian moved with precision. Every motion had purpose. Pouring wine, checking her phone, adjusting a strand of hair that didn't actually need adjusting. "You're going to be late," she said without looking at him. "I thought we were having dinner together tonight." A pause, small, calculated. "We talked about this. I have a client meeting." Ethan frowned slightly. "That's the third time this week." Now she looked at him. Not angry, not defensive, just tired. "This is how my job works, Ethan." He nodded, but the feeling in his chest didn't settle. It hadn't for a while now. "I know," he said quietly. "I just thought maybe we could reschedule your expectations," she cut in, not harshly, but sharply enough. Silence settled between them. There was a time when silence meant comfort. Now it felt like distance measured in inches.
Not recommended
Ethan
for
picked up
viewers
his
under
glass,
18.
but didn't drink. "When was the last time we had dinner without one of us checking emails?" Lillian exhaled, already turning away. "I don't have the energy for this tonight." "That's the problem," he said, softer now. "You never do." That made her stop. Slowly, she turned back to him. Her expression wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was indifferent. "You think I don't notice?" she said. "The way you keep trying to make things simpler than they are? I'm trying to make them real. They are real." "No," Ethan shook his head. "They look real." Another silence, this one heavier. Lillian set her glass down with quiet precision. "I worked too hard to get here, Ethan. I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm not asking you to." "Then what are you asking?" He hesitated, because the truth sounded smaller when spoken out loud. "I'm asking if there's still an us in all of this." For a moment, just a flicker, something passed through her eyes, something human, but it vanished almost instantly. "There is," she said, but it didn't sound convincing, not even to her. Later that night, Ethan stood alone on the balcony. The city below buzzed with life, sirens, laughter, the distant hum of people who still felt connected to something. Inside, the apartment was quiet again. Lillian had left an hour ago. She hadn't said goodbye. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter, staring out at the skyline. He thought about the early days, when Lillian used to laugh easily, when she used to reach for his hand without thinking,
This story is
when love
inspired
wasn't
by
something they
real-life
had to maintain,
situations
it
and
just
includes
existed.
fictional elements for
Now,
entertainment.
it felt like a
Not
structure with
recommended for
invisible
viewers
cracks,
under 18.
still standing, but not for long. The phone buzzed in his pocket, a message from Lillian. "Don't wait up." Ethan stared at it for a long time. Then he typed, "I won't." But he didn't send it. Instead, he slipped the phone back into his pocket and closed his eyes. For the first time, a thought crossed his mind, quiet but undeniable. What if this isn't temporary? Across the city, in a dimly lit restaurant tucked between glass towers, Lillian sat across from a man who made everything feel easier. Victor Hayes. He leaned back in his chair, watching her with a calm confidence that didn't demand attention. It simply held it. "You're distracted tonight," he said. She gave a faint smile. "Just work." "Or your husband?" Lillian didn't answer immediately. Victor studied her. Then, gently, "You don't have to pretend with me." That was the dangerous part. Not the attraction, not the tension, but the relief. Lillian exhaled slowly, setting her glass down. "Sometimes," she said, "I feel like I'm living a life that looks right, but doesn't feel right." Victor didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just listened. And somehow, that felt more intimate than anything she'd experienced in months. "Then maybe," he said quietly, "you're allowed to want something different." Lillian met his eyes, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Back on the balcony, Ethan opened his eyes. The wind had picked up, cold, sharp, unforgiving. He stepped back inside, closing the door behind him. The apartment felt larger now, emptier, like something had already begun to leave, even before either of them admitted it. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, and though Ethan didn't know it yet, it was already coming for him. The rain started just after midnight, not heavy at first, just a fine mist clinging to the windshield, blurring the edges of the city into something softer, almost unreal. Ethan barely noticed it as he drove downtown, the wipers moving in a slow, rhythmic sweep. His mind wasn't on the road, it was still on Lillian. On the way, she hadn't said goodbye. On the way, her eyes had looked through him instead of at him. The radio murmured quietly in the background, some late-night talk show filling the silence he didn't want to sit in. Ethan tightened his grip on the steering wheel, exhaling slowly. Maybe it's just a phase. People said that about marriages all the time. They said distance was normal, that ambition changed people, that love didn't always look like it used to. But no one ever talked about the moment you started to feel like a stranger in your own life. The light ahead turned yellow. Ethan slowed slightly, his thoughts drifting again, to the message he hadn't sent, to the question he didn't dare ask again, to the quiet, creeping realization that something was already breaking. The light turned red. He pressed the brake. Across the intersection, a black SUV sped through the rain. Too fast, too late. The impact was violent, a deafening crack of metal collapsing into itself, glass exploding outward like shards of frozen light. Ethan didn't have time to react, only a flash of headlights, a sharp, blinding white. Then nothing. Somewhere far away there were voices, muffled, distant, like they were speaking through water. Male, mid-30s, pulse weak, get the stretcher, head trauma, possible internal bleeding. Stay with me, sir, can you hear me? Ethan tried to respond. He really did, but his body didn't listen. Darkness pulled him under before he could even understand what was happening. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and exhaustion. Lillian stood just outside the ICU, her arms folded tightly across her chest, as if holding herself together by force alone. Her hair was still perfectly in place, her coat immaculate. Only her eyes betrayed something was wrong. He's stable, the doctor said carefully, but the injuries are severe. Lillian nodded once. What does that mean? It means, the doctor continued, choosing each word with clinical precision, he's in a coma. There's significant brain trauma. We don't know when or if he'll regain consciousness. Silence, the kind that presses against your ears. How long? She asked. It's impossible to say. Days, weeks, months. A pause. Possibly longer. Lillian's expression didn't change, not visibly, but something behind her eyes shifted subtle, almost imperceptible, like a door quietly closing. Is he aware? She asked. We don't believe so. Another silence. Then, almost mechanically, what are the options? The doctor hesitated. Right now, we'll continue intensive care, monitor brain activity, support vital functions. And after that, if there's no improvement... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Inside the ICU, Ethan lay motionless. Machines breathed for him. Monitors traced the fragile rhythm of a body caught between holding on and letting go. Lillian stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping inside. She didn't rush to him, didn't collapse, didn't cry. She simply walked to the side of the bed and looked down at him. This man, her husband, the one who used to make her laugh over burnt toast on Sunday mornings, the one who used to hold her hand like it was instinct, now reduced to stillness, to silence, to something that felt distant. I'm here, she said quietly. But even to her own ears, it sounded like an obligation, not a promise. Days blurred into each other. Hospital visits between meetings, phone calls taken in hallways, emails answered beside the hum of machines. At first, people checked in constantly. Friends, colleagues, concern wrapped in polite messages. But time passed, and concern faded. Because life, real life, didn't stop. Not even for tragedy. 2 weeks later, Lillian sat in the doctor's office again. The same calm voice, the same careful words. There's been minimal neurological response, he said. We are not seeing meaningful improvement. Lillian stared at the folder in front of her. Charts, numbers, evidence. All of it pointing to something she didn't want to say out loud. What are you recommending? She asked. The doctor leaned forward slightly. We should begin discussing long-term care options. Meaning? A specialized facility, one equipped for extended coma patients. Her jaw tightened. This hospital isn't equipped? It is, but the cost of indefinite ICU care is substantial. There it was. Not just grief, not just uncertainty, but reality. Practical, unforgiving. Lillian leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, something had changed. Not broken, not shattered, just recalibrated. I think about it, she said. That night, she didn't go to the hospital. Instead, she found herself sitting in a quiet bar downtown. The kind of place where no one asked questions. Where the lighting was dim enough to hide things you didn't want seen. Victor Hayes slid into the seat across from her without asking. You disappeared, he said lightly. Busy. With work? Lillian picked up her glass, staring at the amber liquid inside. With everything. Victor studied her for a moment. I heard about your husband. She stiffened slightly. I'm sorry. She nodded once. Thank you. Silence settled between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was easy. That was the problem. Victor leaned forward slightly. How is he? Lillian hesitated. Then, quietly, he's not there. Victor didn't respond immediately. Didn't offer false hope. Didn't say the wrong thing. He simply said, that's a difficult place to be. And somehow, that felt more honest than anything else she'd heard. Back at the hospital, Ethan's condition didn't change. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into something heavier. Something permanent. The decision came on a Tuesday morning. No drama, no tears. Just a signature at the bottom of a page. Transfer authorization. A quieter facility. Less expensive. Less hopeful. Lillian stared at the paper for a long time after signing it, as if waiting to feel something. Guilt, relief, anything. But all she felt was tired. The day Ethan was moved, she didn't go with him. She told herself it was because of work, because of scheduling, because of everything that sounded reasonable. But deep down, she knew. She wasn't ready to see what he had become, or what she had chosen. As the ambulance doors closed, rain began to fall again. Soft at first, then heavier, washing the city clean of things it didn't want to remember. And somewhere inside that silent, unmoving body, something shifted. Not enough to wake him, not enough to be noticed, but enough to begin. The first time Lillian noticed the quiet, it felt like relief. No machines, no sterile air, no endless waiting rooms filled with the low hum of other people's tragedies. Just silence. Her apartment, once a shared space, had begun to reshape itself around her alone. Ethan's shoes were still by the door, but she no longer tripped over them. His books remained on the shelf, but she had stopped noticing their titles. Absence, she realized, didn't arrive all at once. It settled in gradually, like dust. Another late night. Victor's voice was smooth, almost amused, as he stepped into her office unannounced. Lillian didn't look up immediately. You know, most people wait to be invited. Victor smiled, closing the door behind him. Most people don't bring better coffee than whatever that is. She glanced at the cup he set on her desk. A small gesture. Insignificant, really, but intentional. Flattery and caffeine, she said dryly. That's your strategy? It's working, isn't it? For a moment, she almost smiled. The meetings became routine after that. First professional, then less so. Lunches that stretched longer than necessary. Conversations that wandered away from work and into the spaces people usually avoided. Victor had a way of listening that made silence feel safe. He didn't interrupt, didn't fix, didn't judge. And after weeks of being surrounded by doctors who spoke in probabilities and outcomes, after weeks of conversations that revolved around a man who couldn't answer back, that kind of presence felt grounding. You don't have to carry everything alone, Victor said one evening. They were sitting in a quiet restaurant, the city lights reflecting in the glass like distant constellations. Lillian swirled the wine in her glass, watching it instead of him. I'm not alone. No, Victor agreed softly. You're just the only one still living in it. She looked up at that. Something in her expression tightened. What's that supposed to mean? It means, he said carefully, you've been standing still for weeks, and the world doesn't stop with you. Lillian held his gaze. Part of her wanted to argue, to defend something she wasn't even sure she still believed in, but another part, a quieter, more dangerous part, understood exactly what he meant. That night she didn't go home right away. Instead she found herself driving. No destination, no urgency, just movement. The city blurred past her in streaks of light and shadow, rain tapping softly against the windshield like a memory she couldn't quite place. Her phone buzzed, a message from the hospital. No change in patient condition. Lillian stared at it, read it once, then again. No change. Two words that had begun to define everything. No improvement, no response, no return. Her grip tightened slightly on the steering wheel. How long, she whispered to herself. How long was she supposed to wait? For what? For a man who might never wake up? For a life that had already begun to disappear? The next morning she visited the facility. It was quieter than the hospital. Less urgent. Less hopeful. The kind of place where time didn't move forward, it simply existed. Ethan lay in the same position. Unchanged. Unmoving, unreachable. Lillian stood beside him, arms crossed, her posture composed. She studied his face, trying to find something familiar, something that still felt like him. But it was difficult, because the man she remembered had been alive in ways this version wasn't. He had argued, laughed, looked at her like she was the center of something real. This was just a body, A presence without presence. "I came by," she said quietly. The words felt hollow the moment they left her lips. She waited, not for a response, just out of habit. Nothing came. Of course it didn't. Later that day, she met Victor again. This time, she didn't pretend it was about work. "You look different," he said as she sat across from him. "Do I?" "Lighter." Lillian considered that, then shook her head slightly. "That's not the word I'd use." "What would you use?" She hesitated. Then, detached. Victor leaned back, studying her. "And how does that feel?" She let out a slow breath. "Easier." There it was. Not love, not desire, but something just as powerful. Relief. Their first touch wasn't dramatic. No sudden passion. No reckless urgency. Just a moment small enough to be ignored. As Lillian reached for her glass, her fingers brushed against his. She didn't pull away immediately. Neither did he. And in that pause, something shifted. Not broken, not forced, just allowed. Weeks passed, the lines blurred. Dinner became routine. Routine became expectation. And expectation quietly turned into something neither of them named. Because naming it would make it real. And real meant consequences. "You don't talk about him anymore," Victor said one night. They were at his apartment now. A space that felt warmer than hers. Less curated, more lived in. Lillian stood by the window, looking out at the city. "There's nothing to say. He's still your husband." The word lingered in the air, heavy, uncomfortable. Lillian turned slowly. "Is he?" Victor didn't answer, because the truth was already there, waiting. That question followed her home, into the silence, into the empty spaces Ethan used to fill. She stood in the bedroom for a long time that night, looking at his side of the bed, untouched, unchanged, unnecessary. Finally, she walked to the closet, opened it, and paused. Her hand hovered over his jackets. Then, slowly, she moved them aside, making space. The next morning, she signed another document. Not a transfer, not a medical form, but something quieter, more final in its own way. A financial authorization, reducing care, limiting intervention. Line drawn not in words, but in intention. She told herself it was practical, that it was realistic, that it was what anyone would do in her position. And maybe that was true. But truth, she was learning, wasn't always the same as honesty. That night, she didn't go home. She stayed with Victor. And for the first time in weeks, she slept without dreaming. Miles away, in a quiet room where no one was watching, Ethan's fingers twitched. Just once. Barely noticeable. Barely real. But enough to prove that something inside him was still fighting, even if no one was waiting anymore. At first, it wasn't sight that returned. It was sound. A dull, rhythmic beeping, slow, uneven, like something struggling to remember its purpose. It echoed through a space Ethan couldn't yet understand, cutting through the thick, suffocating darkness that had wrapped around him for something. Time didn't exist there. Not in days, not in nights. Just absence. Then came the weight. Heavy, immovable. His body didn't feel like his own. It felt borrowed. Like something he had to relearn how to inhabit. And then pain. Sharp, immediate, alive. It surged through him without warning, dragging him violently upward from wherever he had been. His eyes opened. The ceiling above him was unfamiliar. Not the sterile brightness of a hospital. Not the polished calm of somewhere designed to heal. This place was different. The paint was slightly yellowed, the light dimmer, the air heavier. For a long moment, Ethan just stared, breathing, or rather trying to. Each breath felt deliberate, forced, like his body didn't trust him yet. "What?" His voice cracked before the word could form. Dry, weak, almost unrecognizable. A shadow moved beside him. "Oh." A nurse stepped into view, startled, her eyes widening. "Sir, can you hear me?" Ethan blinked slowly. Everything felt delayed, like reality was arriving seconds too late. He tried to nod. It barely registered. Okay, that's good," the nurse said quickly, reaching for something behind her. "You're safe. Just stay with me, all right? I'm calling the doctor." Safe. The word felt distant, meaningless. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Ethan couldn't tell. Faces came and went. Questions were asked. Lights were shined into his eyes. Hands moved him, adjusted things, checked things. He answered what he could, which wasn't much. "Do you know your name?" "Ethan." "Good, that's good. Do you know where you are?" He hesitated. "No." "That's okay, that's normal." Nothing felt normal. Memory didn't return all at once. It came in fragments, like broken glass. A balcony, rain on a windshield, a red light, and then impact. Ethan's breath hitched slightly. The machines beside him reacted before anyone else did. Easy, the doctor said calmly. You've been through a severe trauma. Your body needs time. How long? Ethan forced the words out, each one dragging against the weight in his chest. Was I out? The doctor and nurse exchanged a glance. A brief one, but Ethan saw it, felt it. Several months, the doctor said carefully. Months. The word echoed, expanded, collapsed in on itself. Months of nothing. Months of absence. Ethan swallowed, his throat burning. And my wife? He asked. The question came out quieter than he intended, but it filled the room. The nurse hesitated this time, not just a glance, a pause. I can contact her for you, she said gently. That wasn't an answer. Ethan's eyes shifted to the doctor. Is she here? Silence. Then, she hasn't visited recently. Something in his chest tightened. Not pain, not physical, something else. Recently, he repeated. The doctor exhaled slowly. Your care was transferred here about 6 weeks ago. Transferred. The word felt wrong. From where? A larger hospital in Manhattan. Ethan's gaze sharpened slightly, despite the haze. Why? Another pause. Longer this time. We'd need to discuss that with your family. I am the family, Ethan whispered, something sharper creeping into his voice. Tell me. The doctor studied him for a moment, measuring. Then, long-term care decisions were made, financially and medically. The words were careful, but the meaning wasn't. Ethan stared at the ceiling again. This time, it didn't feel unfamiliar. It felt intentional, like this place wasn't where he ended up. It was where he had been sent. Days passed before he could sit up on his own, before his body began to feel like something more than a distant memory. Recovery was slow, brutal. Every movement required effort. Every breath reminded him how fragile everything had become. But the physical pain wasn't what stayed with him. It was the silence. No calls, no messages, no footsteps that paused outside his door with recognition. Nothing. On the 4th day, he asked again, Has anyone come? The nurse hesitated before answering. No. Ethan nodded, once, as if confirming something he had already begun to understand. It was another week before he saw the file, not intentionally, just left too close. A folder resting on the edge of the desk while a nurse stepped out briefly. Ethan hadn't meant to look, but curiosity wasn't the right word. It was something else, something closer to instinct. He reached for it slowly, his hand still unsteady. Opened it. Pages, forms, signatures. His eyes moved across the lines, struggling to focus, until they found it. Next of kin, Lillian Cole. Below that, a signature, familiar, precise, controlled. And beneath it, authorization. Transfer to extended care facility. Another page, another line. Adjustment of treatment level. Less intervention, less cost, less effort. Ethan's fingers tightened slightly on the paper. The room felt smaller, quieter, like something had been stripped away without his permission. He kept reading, even when he didn't want to, because stopping wouldn't change what was already there. Later that night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Again. But this time, he wasn't disoriented. He wasn't confused. He understood. Not everything, but enough. She hadn't waited. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she didn't want to. Maybe it didn't matter. A memory surfaced then, clearer than the others. Lillian's voice. Calm, controlled. Reschedule your expectations. Ethan let out a slow breath. It almost sounded like a laugh. Almost. The decision didn't come in a dramatic moment. No sudden clarity, no surge of anger. Just a quiet realization. There was nothing left to go back to. 2 weeks later, he was strong enough to walk. Not far, not well, but enough. The facility didn't ask many questions. Places like this rarely did. People came, people stayed, people faded. It wasn't their job to wonder why. The morning he left, the sky was clear, a sharp contrast to the rain he almost remembered. Ethan stood outside the building for a long moment, a small bag in his hand. Everything he had now reduced to what he could carry. No calls made, no messages sent, no goodbyes. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Old. Dead. Disconnected from everything it used to hold. He looked at it for a long time, then dropped it into the nearest trash bin. A passing bus slowed at the corner, doors opening with a quiet hiss. Ethan stepped forward, then paused, just for a second, as if expecting something, someone, to stop him. Nothing came, so he got on, sat by the window, and as the city began to move around him, Ethan Cole disappeared. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with something far more final, indifference. And somewhere, miles away, Lillian continued her life, unaware that the man she had left behind was no longer waiting to be found. Chicago didn't ask questions. That was the first thing he noticed. The city moved differently than New York, less polished, less concerned with appearances. It didn't pretend to be anything other than what it was, layered, restless, alive in a quieter way. For a man trying to disappear, that mattered. He called himself Adrian Cross. The name came easily. No history attached to it, no expectations. No one who would say it and remember something he used to be. Just a name, just a beginning. The apartment was small, a studio on the third floor of an aging brick building in Logan Square. The floors creaked, the radiator hissed unpredictably. The windows let in more cold than they should, but it was enough, more than enough. Because everything inside it belonged only to him. No shared spaces, no silent expectations. No ghost pretending to still be alive. You knew. The voice came from behind the counter. Adrian looked up from the stack of papers he'd been reviewing, momentarily caught off guard. The woman behind the desk studied him with open curiosity, not intrusive, just observant. "Is it that obvious?" he asked. She smiled slightly. "You have that look." "What look?" "Like you're still deciding if you want to stay." Adrian considered that, then nodded once. "Maybe I am." She extended her hand. Maya. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before shaking it. Adrian. The name felt steadier now, more real each time he said it. The job wasn't glamorous. Drafting assistant at a mid-sized architecture firm. Mostly revisions, minor corrections, adjustments no one else had time for. It wasn't what Ethan Cole would have done. But Adrian Cross didn't need recognition. He needed structure, something predictable, something that didn't ask him to be anything more than present. "You're overqualified for this," Maya said one afternoon, leaning against his desk. Adrian didn't look up. "You don't know that? I've seen your work. That doesn't mean anything. It means you're either hiding or starting over." He finally glanced at her. "And if I am?" Maya shrugged lightly. "Then I guess the real question is, which one?" Adrian didn't answer, because the truth was, he didn't know yet. Recovery had been slow, not just physical. That part had come back, piece by piece. Strength returning to muscles that had forgotten their purpose. Balance relearned, endurance rebuilt through quiet persistence. But the other part, the part that led somewhere deeper, that was harder. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was shallow, filled with fragments, rain against glass, a red light, a voice saying something he couldn't quite hear, or maybe didn't want to. He didn't think about Lillian often, at least that's what he told himself, because thinking about her required something he wasn't ready to give, emotion. And emotion meant connection. Connection meant vulnerability. So instead, he focused on smaller things. The way sunlight hit the brick walls across the street in the morning, the sound of the L train rattling in the distance, the quiet routine of making coffee in a space that belonged only to him. "You always sit here." Maya slid into the chair across from him at the cafe, uninvited but not unwelcome. Adrian glanced up from his notebook. "It's a good spot." "It's the same spot. Consistency isn't a bad thing." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "No, but it can be a safe one." He closed the notebook. "Is that a problem?" "Not unless you never leave it." There it was again, that quiet way she had of seeing more than he offered. Adrian leaned back slightly. "You always this direct?" "Only when I think it matters." "And does this matter?" Maya held his gaze. "Yes." He didn't ask her why. Some things didn't need explanation. Weeks turned into months, months into something steadier. Adrian began taking on more work. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. There was something grounding about building again, even if it was just on paper, even if no one knew the mind behind it used to design something bigger. One evening, the firm hosted a small gathering. Nothing extravagant, just drinks, conversation. The kind of social obligation people attended without really wanting to. Adrian almost didn't go, but Maya insisted. "You need to exist outside of your apartment and this cafe," she said. "I exist just fine, barely." He gave in. The room was filled with low voices and soft music. People laughing, networking, performing versions of themselves that felt slightly exaggerated. Adrian stood near the edge, a drink in his hand he hadn't touched. Watching, observing, detached. Until, "You don't look like you belong here." The voice was unfamiliar. He turned slightly. A man in his 40s, well-dressed, confident in the way people were when they knew exactly who they were. "Neither do you," Adrian replied. The man smiled. "Fair enough." They stood in silence for a moment. Then, "What's your story?" the man asked. Adrian's grip tightened slightly around the glass. "I work here." "That's not what I asked." No, it wasn't. Adrian met his gaze, and for a split second there was a choice. To lie, to deflect, to disappear. Instead, he said simply, "I'm starting over." The man studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "Good," he said. "Most people never do." That night, Adrian walked home alone. The city quieter now, the air colder. He passed a storefront window and caught his reflection. For a moment, it felt unfamiliar. Not because it had changed, but because he had. Back in his apartment, he sat by the window, the same way he used to in another life. Different city, different name. Different, everything. But the silence, that was the same. He reached into a drawer, pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, a copy of a document he had never meant to keep. Authorization, signature at the bottom, Lillian Cole. Adrian stared at it for a long time, not with anger, not even with sadness, just awareness, a quiet acknowledgement of something that had already shaped him. He folded it back carefully, placed it away, closed the drawer. Outside, the city moved on, unbothered, unaware. And inside, Adrian Cross sat in the quiet he had built for himself. Not broken, not healed, but something in between. Because no matter how far he had come, the past didn't follow him loudly. It didn't chase, it didn't demand. It simply lingered, in small moments, in quiet spaces, in the parts of him that still remembered what it felt like to be left behind. The penthouse was everything Lillian had once believed she wanted. Expensive glass walls overlooking Central Park, marble floors that echoed softly under every step, lighting that adjusted itself to the hour as if the space understood time better than the people inside it. It was flawless, impressive, and completely devoid of warmth. "You're late." Victor didn't raise his voice. He never did. That was part of the problem. Lillian slipped off her heels near the entrance, setting them neatly aside. "I told you I had a meeting. You told me it would end at 6. It ran over." Victor sat at the dining table, a glass of untouched whiskey in front of him. His posture was relaxed, but his gaze was fixed sharp in a way that didn't need volume to make its point. "You didn't answer your phone." "I was working." "You always say that." Lillian paused, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she was starting to realize none of her answers ever mattered. In the beginning, Victor had felt like stability, a presence that filled the silence Ethan had left behind. He had been attentive, patient, understanding in ways that felt almost effortless. But time had a way of revealing what first impressions concealed. And Victor didn't change. He clarified. "You've been distracted lately," he said, taking a slow sip of his drink. Lillian moved past him, heading toward the kitchen. "I've been busy." "With what?" She stopped, turned slightly. "Work." Victor smiled faintly. "You used to say more than that." "I didn't realize I was being evaluated." "You're not," he said smoothly. "I'm just noticing." "That's the same thing." Another pause, longer this time. He set his glass down carefully. "I don't like feeling like I'm the least important part of your life." Lillian let out a quiet breath, something tight forming beneath her ribs. "You're not." "Then why does it feel that way?" Because she didn't know how to answer that. Not honestly. The truth was, she didn't feel anything the way she used to. Not excitement, not connection, not even conflict. Everything had flattened into something manageable, something controlled, something distant. That night, she lay awake beside him. Victor slept easily, always had, like a man who never questioned the life he built. Lillian stared at the ceiling, her thoughts drifting in directions she tried to avoid. It had been years since the accident, years since the hospital, years since she had signed those papers with a steady hand and a clear mind. At the time, it had felt like a decision. Now, it felt like an absence. She hadn't gone back, not after the transfer, not after the silence stretched long enough to become permanent. At first, she told herself it was because there was nothing left to see. Then, because it would only make things harder. Eventually, she stopped telling herself anything at all. "Do you ever think about him?" The question came out of nowhere, soft, unintended. Victor shifted slightly beside her, not fully awake. "Who?" Lillian hesitated, then, "My husband." The world felt foreign now. Victor didn't respond immediately, then, quietly, "No." Lillian turned her head slightly, looking at him in the dim light. "Why not?" "Because he's not here. Simple, definitive, final." The next morning, the city felt colder, sharper. Lillian moved through her routine with practiced precision. Coffee, emails, meetings, conversations that required just enough attention to seem present, but something lingered beneath it all, a quiet disturbance, like a crack spreading slowly beneath the surface. It happened at lunch, unplanned, unavoidable. She was walking past a small outdoor cafe when she saw them. A couple, nothing remarkable, Just two people sitting too close together, sharing something small and insignificant. Laughing, not carefully, not strategically, just naturally. The woman reached across the table, brushing something from the man's sleeve. The gesture was simple, unconscious, intimate in a way that couldn't be performed. Lillian stopped walking, just for a second. Something about it felt familiar. Not recent, not even clear, but real. And that was enough. Lillian? She blinked, pulled back into the present. Her colleague stood beside her, mid-sentence. Sorry, she said quickly. I just lost my train of thought. It wasn't the truth, but it was close enough. That evening, she arrived home earlier than usual. The penthouse was quiet. Too quiet. She sat her back down, walking slowly through the space. Everything was exactly where it should be. Perfect. Untouched. Unlived. Her steps carried her toward the window. The city stretched endlessly below, alive in ways she no longer felt part of. For a moment, just a moment, she allowed herself to think about him. Ethan. Not as he had been at the end, but before, standing in the apartment, asking a question she had never really answered. Is there still an us in all of this? Her chest tightened. Not sharply, just enough to notice. You're home early. Victor's voice broke the silence behind her. Lillian didn't turn. Meeting got cancelled. He stepped closer, his reflection appearing beside hers in the glass. You should have told me. Why? So I could adjust my plans? She turned then, studying him. When did everything become something that needed to be managed? Victor frowned slightly. That's not what this is, isn't it? Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried something new, something sharper. He stepped closer, too close. You've been different lately, he said. I've been the same, she replied. I just think I'm starting to notice things I didn't before. Like what? Lillian held his gaze. Like how everything with you feels conditional. The word hung in the air. Victor's expression didn't change immediately, but something underneath it did. Subtle, controlled, dangerous. That's not fair. No, she said quietly. I don't think it is either. Silence settled between them. Heavy, uncomfortable, real. Later that night, Lillian stood alone in the living room. Victor had gone to bed without another word. The distance between them felt wider than the space itself. She walked slowly toward the hallway, paused, then turned. Not toward the bedroom, but toward a small storage room near the back of the apartment, a place she rarely entered, because there was nothing there she needed, or so she told herself. Inside, the air was still, unchanged. Boxes lined the shelves, unopened, unmoved, a life she had packed away without ever truly confronting. Lillian stepped forward slowly, reached for one, opened it. Inside, fragments, photos, old documents, pieces of something she had once called hers. Her hand hovered briefly before picking up a photograph. Ethan, smiling. Not posed, not curated, just real. For a moment, the room felt smaller, quieter, like time had folded in on itself. She exhaled slowly, her grip tightening slightly on the photo. And for the first time in years, the decision she had made didn't feel distant. It felt present, immediate, unavoidable. Behind her, the city continued to glow, unchanged, but inside, something had finally begun to crack.
The email arrived on a Thursday morning. Lillian almost didn't open it. It sat buried between client updates and internal memos, indistinguishable from everything else that demanded her attention. The subject line was simple: regarding Ethan Cole. Her hand paused above the trackpad. For a moment, just a moment, she considered ignoring it, deleting it, pretending it had never appeared. But something deeper than logic stopped her, something instinctive, something unfinished. She clicked. The message was brief, professional, detached. Ms. Cole, we are writing to inform you that Mr. Ethan Cole was discharged from our care facility approximately 3 years ago. Due to outdated contact information, this notice was delayed. Please contact us if you require further details. Lillian read it once, then again, and then a third time, slower, as if the meaning might change. It didn't. Her fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the desk. Discharged 3 years ago. Not deceased, not transferred, not gone, just gone. That's not possible. The words slipped out under her breath, barely audible. Her assistant glanced up from across the room. Sorry? Nothing, Lillian said quickly, closing the email. But her mind didn't close with it. It stayed open, wide, unsteady. 3 years. 3 years of believing something had ended quietly. 3 years of not asking questions she didn't want answered. 3 years of building a life on the assumption that the past had settled. But it hadn't. It had simply moved without her. Is everything all right? Victor's voice came from the doorway of her office later that afternoon. Lillian looked up, momentarily disoriented. Yes, she said automatically. He studied her. You look like you've seen a ghost. She almost laughed, but it didn't come out that way. Something like that. Victor stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Do you want to tell me what's going on? She hesitated, then shook her head. It's nothing important. Lillian. There was that tone again, calm, measured, expectant. She met his gaze, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't soften under it. It's my husband, she said. The word felt strange now, outdated, but not untrue. Victor's expression shifted slightly, subtle, controlled. What about him? Lillian exhaled slowly. He's alive. The silence that followed wasn't loud, but it was absolute. Victor didn't react immediately, didn't question, didn't interrupt. He simply stood there, processing, adjusting, calculating. How? He asked finally. I don't know. Where is he? I don't know that either. Victor's jaw tightened slightly. And they're just telling you this now? Yes. That doesn't make sense. No, Lillian agreed quietly. It doesn't. That night, neither of them slept, not really. The air in the penthouse felt different. Not tense, not yet, but unstable. Like something had shifted beneath the surface, and neither of them knew where it would settle. Ethan hadn't planned it this way. In fact, he hadn't planned it at all. Returning to New York wasn't about confrontation or closure, at least not in the way people imagined it. It was simpler than that. He had a meeting, a project his firm was bidding on, just another step in a life he had built piece by piece, carefully, intentionally. You used to live here, didn't you? Maya's voice cut through his thoughts as they stepped out of the cab. Ethan paused briefly. The city felt familiar in ways he couldn't ignore. Same skyline, same rhythm, different weight. A long time ago, he said. She studied him. You okay? He nodded once. Yeah, it wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The building stood exactly as he remembered. Glass, steel, precision, unchanged. For a moment, he considered turning back. Not out of fear, but because he wasn't sure what was left to face. Then the doors opened, and he walked in. Lillian saw him before she understood what she was looking at. It happened in a moment so small, it almost didn't exist. A shift in the room. A presence that didn't belong. Her eyes moved instinctively and stopped. Time didn't freeze. That's what people always said, but it wasn't true. Time didn't stop. It stretched. Pulled thin between seconds that suddenly held too much. He stood near the far end of the room. Different, but unmistakable. Ethan. Alive. Standing. Looking calm. Her breath caught. Not dramatically, just enough to remind her that she still had one. Lillian? Victor's voice came from beside her, but it felt distant, muted, because everything else had faded. Ethan met her eyes, and for a moment, nothing happened. No anger, no accusation, no visible emotion at all, just recognition. He took a step forward, then another, each movement measured. Controller, like he had rehearsed this, or maybe like he didn't need to. Hi. The word was simple, neutral, almost polite. Lillian stared at him, her mind struggling to catch up. Her voice faltered. You're alive, he finished for her. There was no edge in his tone, no bitterness, just fact. Victor stepped forward then, positioning himself slightly between them. Protective or possessive, it was hard to tell. You must be mistaken, he said smoothly. Ethan's gaze shifted to him, calm, unimpressed. I'm not. Lillian, Victor said quietly, you don't have to engage with this. But she wasn't listening to him, not anymore. Her focus was locked on Ethan, on the man she had left behind, on the man who was supposed to remain gone. How? She asked. It wasn't a question about logistics. It was something deeper, something closer to, why didn't you stay gone? Ethan tilted his head slightly. I woke up. The simplicity of it felt heavier than any accusation. You didn't contact me, Lillian said, her voice tightening slightly. Ethan held her gaze. No, why? A pause. Not long, but deliberate. Then, because you already made your decision. The words landed quietly, but they stayed. Victor's expression hardened slightly. This isn't the place for this conversation. Ethan looked at him again. You're right. He turned back to Lillian. I'm not here to disrupt anything. Then why are you here? She asked. And there it was, the real question. Ethan considered it, not carefully, not defensively, just honestly. To finish something, he said. Silence followed, heavy, unavoidable. I'm not the same person you left, he continued, and I'm not here to be. Lillian's chest tightened slightly. Then what do you want from me? Ethan shook his head once. Nothing. That was the part she wasn't prepared for. Not anger, not resentment, not even forgiveness. Just absence. I just thought, he added quietly. You should know I didn't disappear because I had nowhere else to go. His gaze softened slightly, not with affection, but with something that looked a lot like closure. I disappeared because I chose to. Victor stepped forward again, his tone sharper now. If you're done, I am, Ethan said calmly. He looked at Lillian one last time. Not searching, not waiting, just seeing. Then he turned and walked away. No hesitation, no glance back. Lillian stood there, unmoving, her mind racing to catch something that had already passed. Say something, Victor said, his voice low now. But she couldn't, because for the first time, she understood something she hadn't before. He hadn't come back for her. He hadn't come back at all. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. The city didn't change after that night. Traffic still moved in steady lines. People still filled sidewalks with conversations that had nothing to do with loss or regret. The skyline remained untouched, glass and steel reflecting a world that never paused for personal collapse. But for Lillian, everything felt quieter. Not in the sense of peace, but in the absence of illusion. Victor didn't mention Ethan again, not directly, but something in him had shifted, subtly, irreversibly. You should have told me sooner, he said one evening, his tone calm but edged with something colder. They were sitting across from each other, the distance between them larger than the table itself. I didn't know, Lillian replied. That he was alive? That it would matter? Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. Everything matters. No, she said quietly. Not everything. That was the beginning of the unraveling. Not loud, not explosive, just a slow, steady pulling apart. Victor became more attentive, more present, but not in the way he used to be. There was something sharper in it now, a need to reclaim control over something he couldn't fully define. You've been distant, he said days later. I've been thinking. About him? Yes. The honesty surprised even her. Victor didn't react immediately. Then I don't like competing with a ghost. Lillian looked at him for a long moment. He's not a ghost. No, Victor said quietly. He's a reminder. Of what? He didn't need to say it. She already knew. That night, Lillian stood alone in the penthouse again. But it didn't feel like hers anymore. Not really. It felt like something she had stepped into, not something she had built. She walked toward the storage room without thinking, opened the door. The same boxes waited, unchanged, patient. This time she didn't hesitate. She opened them one by one. Photos, letters, fragments of a life she had sealed away without understanding the weight of what she was leaving behind. Her hands moved slower now, more careful, as if each object carried something fragile she hadn't noticed before. At the bottom of one box, she found it. A notebook. Worn. Familiar. Ethan's handwriting filled the pages. Sketches, notes, ideas that never asked for recognition, just expression. Lillian sat down on the floor, the notebook resting in her lap. And for the first time in years, she read. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic confessions, just thoughts, moments, small observations about life, about work, about her. She doesn't realize how quiet she's become. Her breath caught slightly. I think she's trying to hold everything together so tightly that there's no space left for anything real. Lillian closed her eyes, just for a second. I don't need perfection. I just need to know she's still here with me, not just beside me. The words didn't accuse, they didn't blame, they simply existed. And somehow that made them harder to bear. She closed the notebook slowly, her fingers lingering against the cover. For a long time, she didn't move, didn't think, didn't try to justify anything, because there was nothing left to justify. Upstairs, Victor moved through the apartment alone. He paused by the window, staring out at the city below. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel in control, and he didn't like it. "You're leaving." The words came from behind her. Lillian didn't turn. She stood in the bedroom now, a small suitcase open on the bed. Not packed, just present. "I think I already did," she said quietly. Victor stepped closer. "This is about him." "No," she replied. "This is about me." "That's the same thing." "It's not." He studied her carefully, looking for hesitation, for uncertainty, for something he could still shape. But it wasn't there. "You're making a mistake," he said. Lillian zipped the suitcase slowly. Maybe he was right, but for the first time, that didn't feel like something she needed to avoid. "I already did," she said softly. She didn't take much with her, just the essentials. The rest, she left behind. Chicago felt colder than she expected, or maybe it was just different without the insulation of certainty. Ethan Adrian stood near the edge of the construction site, reviewing the plans in his hands. The building was still skeletal, unfinished, but solid in its foundation. That was what mattered. "You're distracted again." Maya's voice carried a familiar note of observation. He glanced up slightly. "Am I?" "Yes." He folded the plans, exhaling slowly. "Just thinking. About New York?" A pause. Then, "Yes." She stepped closer, studying him. "Do you regret going back?" Ethan considered the question. Not quickly, not defensively, just honestly. "No." "Do you regret leaving?" Another pause, longer this time. Then, "No." Maya nodded once, as if that confirmed something. "Good," she said. That evening, Ethan walked home alone. The city moved around him, alive in ways he no longer felt separate from. He passed the storefront window, caught his reflection again. This time, it didn't feel unfamiliar. Back in his apartment, he stood by the window. The same quiet, the same stillness. But it wasn't empty anymore. His phone buzzed softly on the table. An unknown number. He looked at it for a moment, long enough to consider, long enough to understand. Then, he silenced it. Not out of anger, not out of fear, but because some chapters didn't need reopening to be understood. Across the city, in a small, unfamiliar apartment, Lillian sat alone. No glass walls, no curated silence, just space, real, unpolished. She held the notebook in her hands again. Ethan's handwriting still steady across the pages, unchanged, even if everything else wasn't. Tears came quietly, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just present. Because regret didn't arrive all at once. It settled, slowly, in the spaces left behind. And some losses weren't meant to be fixed. They were meant to be understood. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, the faint hum of the city surrounding him. Not overwhelming, not distant, just part of something larger. He had lost something once, that was true. But he had also found something else. Himself. And this time, he didn't need anyone else to confirm it was real.